Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Starclough Disability Institute and the Diversity Awareness Partnership, I would like to welcome everyone to today's presentation, Black Disabled Lives Matter, a national outlook with thought leaders. My name is Lori Becker, and I am the Chief Operating Officer at Starclough Disability Institute, and it is my pleasure to co-facilitate today's presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Melissa Bricky. I am the Executive Director of Diversity Awareness Partnership, and I will be co-facilitating today's conversation. We have a great discussion ahead of us today.
Before we dive in, I want to go over a few of the technical aspects of today's event format. This webinar is being recorded and will be distributed to all attendees following the presentation. Please note that captioning and interpreting services are available throughout this presentation. And if you need access to these features, please refer to the guide that was sent via email to this event. We will also be actively monitoring the Q&A and the chat boxes. So please don't hesitate to ask your questions as they arise. If you see a question that you would also like to have someone answered, you can give it an upvote with a thumbs up. And we will prioritize this for our Q&A portion of the presentation.
Diversity Awareness Partnership is excited to partner today with Starclough Disability Institute to bring you this important conversation during Disability Pride Month and as we approach the 30th anniversary of the ADA. DAP's mission is to be a catalyst to increase awareness, facilitate engagement, and provide education about diversity and inclusion. Our vision is inclusive communities where diversity is respected and embraced and equity is the norm. And one of our core values is collaboration. So we're thrilled today to be able to co-present this session with Starclough Disability Institute.
The Starclough Disability Institute works to create a world that welcomes all people with disabilities through pathways to employment, education, and universal access. Our theme for Disability Pride Month is Diversity Includes Disability. We aim to advance the local and national conversation and explore how the many identities a person has, disability, race, gender, and socioeconomic status interact to shape their experience in the world.
We really appreciate everyone being here today. Today's conversation is important. It shines a light on the inequity and disparity that exists even within the disability community itself. Behind statistics are individuals in our community who identify as disabled and Black, identities that we should be celebrating and honoring, and voices that ought to be amplified and listened to. The realities, though, are sobering.
1 in 9 working age adults have a disability, and the highest prevalence is among African Americans with a rate of 14%. Out of more than the 3 million working age African Americans with disabilities, barely 934,000 have jobs. Only 28.6% of US African Americans with disabilities ages 18 to 34 living in the community have a job, compared to 73.7% of Blacks without disabilities. And Missouri ranks among the worst states in employment of individuals who are both disabled and Black at a rate of 23%. So now to talk about what's behind these statistics, I'd like to introduce today's speakers. Janet LaBreck. In February of 2013, President Barack Obama announced some key administrative roles, including his intent to nominate Janet L. LaBreck, known as a national thought leader and keynote presenter, as the Commissioner of the Rehabilitation Services Administration, the RSA, within the United States Department of Education. In August of 2013, LaBreck was confirmed by the United States Senate as the commissioner of the RSA. The RSA was established to provide leadership and resources to assist state and other agencies providing vocational rehabilitation services to individuals with disabilities to maximize their employment, independence, and integration into the community and workforce. And under her leadership, LaBreck was responsible for promulgating the most substantive regulation changes to the vocational rehabilitation program in over 15 years. She began her 27-year career with the Massachusetts Commission for the Blind, where she served as the commissioner during the last 6 years of her appointment by Governor Patrick until she transitioned to Washington, D.C. She is also the recipient of numerous awards and honors, including an honorary doctorate degree from the New England College of Optometry for her involvement and partnership which resulted in the establishment of a mobile eye care clinic for individuals with low vision conditions. And in 2017, that same college dedicated the Janet L. LaBreck Center for Low Vision Rehabilitation Clinic in her honor in recognition of her commitment and dedication for the field of blindness. Most recently, LaBreck has established Janet L. LaBreck Consulting, LLC, in addition to becoming the founder of Synergy Consulting Partners.
We'd also like to welcome Dr. Donna Walton. Dr. Donna Walton has spent over 20 years in diversity and disability employment services, where she distinguished herself as a leader and advocate for equal rights for persons with disabilities in both public and private sectors, including the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and the George Washington University Center for Rehabilitation, Counseling, Research, and Education. A certified cognitive behavioral therapist and founder and CEO of Leg Talk, Inc., Dr. Walton's work fills a void in the rehabilitation community through servicing underemployed women and teens with disabilities in the District of Columbia. During the Obama administration, Dr. Walton was officially tagged as an inaugural member of the White House Disability Liaison's Disability African American Kitchen Cabinet and served as moderator for official White House panel discussions and worked on issues of accessibility and inclusion. Dr. Walton earned her bachelor's degree from American University, a master's degree from Syracuse University, and a doctoral degree in counseling from the George Washington University, where she's a former faculty member. She is a board member of the National Disability Institute and Respectability. Her newest endeavor, the Divas with Disabilities Project, has made an unprecedented impact on disability and women of color communities as a hub for thoughtful discussions on issues, self-love, and showing up unapologetically in all forms of media. She is the author of Shattered Dreams, Broken Pieces, where she tells her story of reinvention through thousands of hours of working with other amputees, building community-based projects, and raising awareness across the globe for unapologetically showing up as a beautiful Black disabled woman. Donna shares her journey and asks, what's a leg got to do with it? Donna has taken refuge, remembering that life is not how you survive the storm, but more how you dance in the rain. As a public speaker, Walton reaches and moves her audiences using her unique journey as evidence of how to live life in the face of adversity with passion and courage. Walton's ability to captivate and motivate audiences through her trademark blend of humor, storytelling, and education has earned her numerous speaking engagements and awards throughout her career. As a fellow amputee myself, I am inspired and grateful for her work, and I am personally honored to have the chance to talk with Dr. Walton today. I welcome you both, Dr. LaBreck and Dr. Walton. We're delighted and honored to have you with us here today.
Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure.
So today we have 4 critical topics that we're going to try to cover in the very short amount of time that we have together today. Those topics are employment, the COVID-19 pandemic and how it has affected the disability community, activism, and the civil unrest, racial tensions in our country, and the media. We have a lot of questions already developed in each of these topics, but we certainly invite the audience to submit questions through the Q&A as well, either related to these topics or other things that you might be interested in hearing about as the discussion progresses. So I'm going to turn it over to Lori, who's going to pose a couple questions to our panelists, and we'll get started in the conversation.
Great, thanks, and welcome to you both. So excited to have you here. So the first topic deals with employment of people with disabilities in the Black community, to which you both have done so much work. So to what do you attribute the continuous lack of people with disabilities employed at all levels, and especially people of color with disabilities? What is the bias, and how can we challenge that bias?
So
And,
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. And Janet, would you like to start with that?
Sure. Thank you again for inviting me to be a part of the conversation today. These are very, very important topics, and I think that we will learn a lot by the end of the conversations today. I think that one of the things that continues to be a barrier and contribute to the underemployment of African Americans with disabilities is certainly multifaceted. I don't think there's just one specific area. I think there are multiple areas, and one of which I think continues to be an internal barrier with regard to policies and practices that are occurring both nationally as well as at a local level. All the more reason why I think that the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, when enacted in July of 2014 and signed into law by President Obama, had a significant impact on, I think, the way that individual agencies that provide services to individuals in the disability community nationally look into communities and look into their own internal policies and practices. And Congress deliberately, I think, flexed the ability of those policies and regulations for agencies to begin that conversation and to have a dialogue and to put into practice the ability of those agencies and individuals working in a range of communities across the country to look internally and look within the communities to discover and provide services and supports to individuals who may in fact be disconnected youth in the communities, and have a better understanding of where those individuals are within their respective communities, who are the important service providers for those individuals, who are important in the community themselves. Is it the churches? Is it private nonprofit organizations that oftentimes are embedded in the African American communities? There are social justice leaders as well. And I think that there are purposeful opportunities within the Workforce and Innovation and Opportunity Act for agencies to work within those respective organizations and agencies to help with identifying some of the issues and some of the continuous barriers that limit the ability of those individuals to be served, but also to get the skill sets, the job training. I also think that it's also a lack of information as well as expectations on the part of both individuals as well as families, as well as policymakers and society as a whole, to really begin to raise the bar and increase the accountability so that the expectation is not that you will serve individuals just for the sake of serving them, but it's very purposeful and looking at ways to identify strategies and put those supports in place that are going to help those individuals navigate their way through these various systems. And I think also from a systems approach, it really means that we need to think very differently about asking individuals to be served by multiple agencies when in fact these individuals can be served collectively, and there should be a seamless process that occurs so that individuals aren't having to become disconnected and fragmented with the service delivery process. And so I think that attitudes and barriers also play a systemic role in our society about the abilities and the talent source that is out there within the disability community in general. And so I think that we have some ongoing work that needs to be done with that. And I think certainly the fact that we are here celebrating the 30th anniversary of the ADA is really important. And while we have accomplished a lot in this particular piece of legislation, we still have a ways to go. And I think that looking at these types of issues and continuing to work on putting the appropriate, I think, emphasis on providing those services to the African American disability community really will help to continue to address these issues and put in the types of supports that are critical to helping to move the disability community forward.
Mm-hmm. And if I can just add to that, I mean, Janet sort of gave a real comprehensive sort of answer in terms of the policy structures and systemic issues that need to be addressed in terms of increasing employment of people of color with disabilities. But I like to look at it from the fact of the bias. And I like to look at the fact that the attitudes and the way by which the perceptions of including individuals with disabilities needs to really be focused on. And unfortunately, we're not able to legislate and mandate attitudes, you know, an attitude shift in organizations that really do need to shift in order to be more inclusive and to have programs and policies that truly speak to the cultural implications of hiring individuals with disabilities who are Black and brown individuals. That really does call for a more strategic and more creative approach of looking at how you're going to serve and promote and retain individuals of color with disabilities. So that's what I like to just sort of add to that.
Absolutely.
Thank you both for that. So kind of along those same lines, Donna, and as you think, I know you do a lot of work as it relates to media and just sort of the mm-hmm. public perception of people with disabilities. What are some ways that we can make sure to amplify voices of people with non-visible disabilities in the same way that we amplify voices of people with visible disabilities?
Well, you know, when I think about non-disability, I mean, non-visible, I guess you could say, I like to think about the experience as being the same, that we really have to approach it from the human experience and not dissect whether a person has a visible or a non-apparent disability, because we want to really approach it from the fact that people are, first of all, coming into an experience with their ability. And so we don't want to, I don't like to think of it looking at the deficit of an individual. So versus whether it's visible or invisible. So how do I approach this individual? I think we should just always be able to approach an individual from the human experience and beginning from that standpoint. Because how would it matter if whether or not I have autism, if I am, competent and if I am, sort of moving about my world in a very positive and, and contributing way? I don't understand why it makes a difference. So I don't really see the difference in how we should treat visible versus invisible. Oh, I guess visible versus non-apparent, because the fact that it's so fluid, disability is so fluid, is that because you can't see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And because you see it doesn't mean it really does exist. So I just want to make that point.
And this is Janet. I would add to that as well, and certainly agree that when you're approaching individuals from the human experience, I think that barriers automatically go down. And those barriers typically are what prohibits or limits individuals, whether they have a disability or not, from experiencing their full potential. And I think that one of the distinctions that I like to draw an analysis to as well is when you think about our physical environments that we're in the disability community, we often talk about, the physical access, and that we are constantly trying to limit the ability of those physical limitations to keep us out of a physical location and participation in an activity. And I think that when you think about it from the human experience, I like to think about it also from a more universal design approach as well, because I think that when we approach each other as from a human perspective, we're not thinking about those barriers. We've already broken down those barriers. And I think that the more universally we can think about how we communicate, what we bring to the relationship, what we bring to the workforce, what we bring to our families as individuals, I think that we then are approaching the human experience from a more equitable position.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Janet, you touched on this earlier when you kind of talked about the kind of like a systems approach. The next question, it feels very easy for policymakers to focus on a particular identity when addressing a systemic discrimination and other issues. And why is this a problem? And what can we as their constituents do to ensure that a particular policies that are pushed are inclusive of multiple identities?
Well, I think the first part of your question, why is it a problem? It's a problem because when we're thinking from that very narrow scope of perspective, then we're automatically excluding, we're not including. Mm-hmm. And that it becomes even more challenging when you think about the percentage, the number. First of all, if you're thinking about working age adults with disabilities, for example, there are approximately 22 million working age adults with disabilities in this country. And it is coming from that perspective, if you're thinking about the attitudes and the barriers that are often expressed, and you're thinking about it from that approach, it really means that you are continuing to perpetuate, the what I would refer to as a stigma or a myth about the capabilities, the abilities, the strengths of individuals with disabilities. So when you think about it from that perspective, what's wrong with it is that it's not inclusive, and that we risk taking advantage of incredibly talented individuals who may be out there, who can contribute, who are willing to contribute, who do contribute, who can become leaders, who offer resources and can change the paradigm also, whether it's in the workforce or whether it's in your individual's family, it's in our society as a whole. So I think we risk minimizing and certainly exacerbating that existing paradigm. And I think also what certainly moving forward with the policies, when policies are geared towards, one specific issue, again, those policies inherently exclude other scenarios, other individuals, other lifestyles, other situations, other disability groups, and that our policies really should be approached as, again, from a universal design approach of how best to position those policies and regulations so that they in fact are inclusive and are flexible enough to accommodate, I think, the various strengths and abilities that individuals certainly bring to the table.
And that's a very good point you make in terms of being inclusive, and how do we do that? And I think that's where the challenges are, in terms of how do you make systems or design systems that are inclusive. I think that's where we've had these sort of stops and misses, in a sense, in that it just seems to always get stuck as to how do you just broaden the whole system so that it is inclusive, that it intersects, and everyone's sort of needs, if you will, are addressed in that particular system. And it seems like it always just gets really confusing as to what inclusion really means.
Mhm.
So I think you make a really good point about that, Janet.
Yeah, I agree, and it can get confusing. And I also would say realistically, there is no policy or regulation that can resolve every aspect of an individual's life or every program, and that the purpose of having policies and regulations really is to lie a foundation down for setting, you know, certainly expectations and rules and regulations around how to best, you know, serve a population of people. And I think that one of the reasons I think that that's important, obviously, is because, you know, those policies and regulations reflect the people that are sitting around the table who are writing those policies and who are implementing them. But it also is important to recognize that those policies also are very inclusive, typically, of stakeholders, family members, individuals from the disability community. And, you know, I think that it's important to have those collective as well as individual voices so that it does, in fact, you know, certainly set the stage for more inclusive dialogue, more inclusive rules and regulations. And so you know, each time regulations and policies are promulgated, I think that it gets a little bit clearer, and certainly stakeholders. And that's the reason why it's so important to have the community engagement around that. But I think also we need to do a much better job in terms of those policies and regulations as it pertains to different populations like the Black community, for example, and disability community with regard to services. So we need to make sure that policymakers, agencies and organizations, stakeholders, that they reflect the community that's being served also. Because when it doesn't, then you automatically are excluding, and you don't have that voice. That representation is not there.
And that's a good point. This is Donna Walton speaking. So Janet, again, I know that I really respect all of the work that you've been doing, because you've been, you know, sort of at the boots on the ground with policy. And you make a really good point. And I think that that just needs to be emphasized in terms of having the community at the table. You know, if you're not at the table, you cannot participate, and you cannot have all the voices and, you know, the perspectives that are needed to make system change. So I think that you make a really good point of that. And I just wanted to just kind of echo that again.
So we had a request from somebody in our audience to just identify ourselves as we speak, because not everybody has video capabilities. So I'm Melissa Bricky. I'm helping to co-facilitate this. So we're going to shift a little bit into recent months. So of course, we've been dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, the shutdown, and the civil unrest, George Floyd's murder, Ahmaud Arbery, et cetera. But I want to start with COVID-19 in particular. And we had a lot of conversation there about policies and regulations, and about, obviously, a lot of policies and regulations were challenged and questioned as we went into this shutdown mode. Specifically, you know, obviously we know there's well-documented evidence that COVID-19 is negatively impacting the Black community to a greater degree than other groups. In fact, research shows that nationwide Black people are dying at a rate of 2.5 times more that of white people. So Donna, I'll start with you. How has the COVID-19 pandemic specifically impacted the Black disabled community?
Well, from the obvious standpoint, of course, persons with disabilities, and particularly Black people with disabilities, have, you know, disproportionately health issues. So from that standpoint, you know, they're even more at risk and even being isolated in terms of going out. So the isolation becomes further compounded by the fact that they cannot go out because of the risk of course, contracting COVID. The other issues deal with accessibility. And again, accessibility to being able to access the services that they were able to access a little better, easier before, and that is like going to the grocery store, for example. That is even becoming even more critical risk because of in most neighborhoods of Black folk, you have critical food shortages, you have food insecurity in a lot of these communities. And so, it just compounds the issues that already exist anyway. But, for the most part, I really want to say that COVID really does provide a reinforcement of the way people with disabilities in the Black community live, disabled community live, in that many times we're isolated from going out anyway. Because of our disabilities, we don't really go out because things are not accessible. We don't have the income. And so we really don't really see the difference in terms of being, COVID affecting us at this point. It just kind of puts us where we always been. So I think that Black folks really are more resilient at this particular time, those with disabilities, because they're so used to living that type of lifestyle. When I talk to some of the divas, and I call them divas with disabilities, they're empowered Black and brown women with physical disabilities. Some of them sort of lament the fact that being isolated from family and support systems have been a real major and has had a real impact on how they live their lives, because many caregivers, are not able to service individuals. They can't come to their homes, and so that really creates a major barrier in terms of how they get their care. So COVID has really caused a real major impact and affected their lives in that way. But I would see that the most persons that I talk with, the women who I speak with, are really lamenting more about, of course, their health care has to be seriously compromised even more, and also the isolation.
And this is Janet speaking. I think also equally important is the fact that isolation really does result sometimes in decision-making that occurs for individuals in the Black community with disabilities to force them out actually into environments where they probably should not be, as a result of their disability. And so while we face that isolation, we are left oftentimes with no alternative but to go out. We experience this, I think, in particularly with the food security issue for those individuals with disabilities nationally with regard to the SNAP program, and that individuals with disabilities were facing barriers to securing food, and particularly securing home delivery services. And organizations like Respectability and the Coalition of Citizens with Disabilities or other advocacy-based organizations, really saw this as an issue that had an unintended consequence to it as a result of those policies that were not permitting individuals on SNAP benefits to receive home delivery services. That has changed significantly now, but it still exacerbates, I think, the ability of individuals who already are at high risk in living with conditions that have comorbidity implications as a result of their health conditions in this virus. And so that it really does provide, I think, the unfortunate risk factors for individuals who are Black and living in the community and having to be exposed and making decisions because they have no other alternative.
Can I offer a question from the audience? We had a question from the audience about COVID that I'd like to see your thoughts, Janet and Donna. The question is, do you think that COVID can present better hiring opportunities within the persons with disabilities community, potentially widen the applicant pool to include persons that may have transportation or other barriers, but are talented and qualified. With more and more people working from home, the need for accommodation in the workplace are less.
That's a really good point. I thought about COVID in terms of leveling the playing field for persons with disabilities, because now it's equal in terms of access to technology. I think the problem, although the issue may be, is that people with disabilities, Black individuals with disabilities, tend to have lower lower income rates. Their employment rate is already low, so they may even have the technology. So even if they could participate, if the playing field is equal, with them having access to and participating in the workforce using technology. Most people don't even have the technology and are underemployed or unemployed. So it's still a further behind the curve. So in some ways, yes, it does facilitate individuals with disabilities being able to be in the workforce at higher rates, but in other cases, they're right where they started.
And this is Janet. I think also that there is an opportunity here. Usually when I present, I usually say that sometimes in life, adversity and barriers become a pathway to opportunity. And I think that this is one of those areas. It's certainly one that none of us ever expected, but I think that the disability community as a whole community have known for years that individuals with disabilities given the opportunity to be a part of the workforce and utilize strategies as part of accommodations, that individuals with disabilities can in fact work from home. And I think that the argument that accommodations such as working from a home office or home setting has just been shattered by COVID-19 because we look no further than at pretty much every work sector having to really be flexible and flip their model of how their coworkers are working from a home environment utilizing technology. And I think that technology here for the disability community is an opportunity to leverage that playing field as well. But at the same time, technology continues to be a barrier as well for individuals with disabilities. And I think that particularly for the African American community, the cost associated with technology, but also the training skills and the ability for them to secure the training and the skill sets, acquire the skill sets necessary. I do think there is an opportunity here as well for us to look at, not just while we're in the COVID-19 environment, but beyond the COVID-19 environment. And I think that we're not alone as a community in this exploration. I think that obviously corporations and workforces all globally are looking at this issue.
This is Lori speaking. Melissa, thanks for offering that question from the audience. That was an excellent question. Another obvious current events question right now we'd like to turn to, considering the current state of affairs with the deaths of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd, and the civil unrest that continues in the response. I'd like for you to be as completely honest as you can. How are you doing personally? If you'd like to share with us, and is there anything that has surprised you regarding the events related to race in the country right now?
Oh, okay. This is Donna. I like to start with it. Start with that question. I guess I'll start with the second part of the question. How am I doing? I live in this sort of dual reality about how I'm doing. So on one side, of my reality, I have my internal self, which I'm okay spiritually. Spiritually, I'm okay dealing with everything that's going around, the protest and the Black lives that are just being totally abused and murdered, if you will. that piece I come to rest with from my spiritual standpoint. But then I have the other side of my reality that 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 is the pain and disappointment in how we have come so far, but yet not far enough. And we are still on this path. And I feel sometimes hopeless and helpless, if you will, that what can I do to really make the difference? I was very, I wasn't really surprised. I mean, when, you know, sort of the participation and the joining and the allies in the protests, I actually I anticipated it because that piece really for me, the anticipation of seeing all, you know, white folks joining black folks in the movement, so to speak, you know, just really gave me hope that this whole issue is being viewed from a human lens, that people do have a heart. And so that's where I sort of get the encouragement and hopefulness that it will get better, because now we have all individuals now are seeing that it is a human problem. It is a problem that we all have to be participating in if this is going to be solved, and we're going to actually move towards a true equitable, respectful, and you know, non-biased, anti-racist society.
And this is Janet. I would agree. I think that all of us are probably experiencing a range of emotions, and I think that, you know, given where we originally came from in terms of this environment that we're now in, starting with COVID-19, I think has certainly added, you know, to certainly both frustration, confusion at points, and you know, but also I think the resiliency that's being demonstrated, I think is inspirational in terms of having the opportunity to look at this issue, to examine this issue, to confront it, to face it, to learn from it, to share experiences, to dialogue about it, to move through it and get beyond it, but also to be proactive about where we go from here in the future, I think is really critical. Because, you know, let's face it, with the Black community as well as the disability community in general, you know, we're coming from a history of a community that has been marginalized for far too long. And I think that the issues that oftentimes face the disability community, particularly when you're talking about the policing discussion, that for far too many years, and not, this is not in the past, this is in our present as well, individuals with disabilities have been disproportionately victimized, and policies and practices and procedures don't seem to be addressed in order to certainly calm that I think systemic issue that the disability community faces continuously. So that I think that these most recent events also raise a significant amount of questions and concern, but also interest, you know, in the disability community, in the Black community. I think all of these issues combined together really call for us to come together, not only as a community, but as a nation, to really finally sit down and have dialogues and have some plans in place and address why these barriers, why these stigmas, you know, continue to exist. And they do, in fact, collapse our society as a whole. You cannot disproportionately have a segment of society that continues to be marginalized without expecting that there will be a long-term impact, both socially, economically, in our society. We have to help with supporting each other and pulling each other up. And I think that that's where the inspirational part comes from, is that people, I think, are starting to recognize that the value of each other, the importance, you know, of addressing some of these policies and practices that have occurred, and that we pull each other up as a community. And I think that's I'm inspired by that. And I think that the more we can educate and legislate, I think that they go hand in hand. And I don't think you can do one without the other. And I think that it's just so critical. And I think that my hope is that that we work together to be able to address these issues and change that paradigm.
And that's a good point. I just want to sort of elaborate on that piece about the paradigm and the inspirational aspect that you talked about. It's extremely inspirational to see people move into action, because for me, it shows that we are really now looking at shifting the paradigm. We're looking at actually shifting our awareness, our consciousness, and being in a mindset of, inclusion, of respect, of humanity. And that was inspiring for me to see people move into action and address, the racial injustices that, that was experienced around the murders of George Floyd, I apologize.
This is Melissa. So just, thinking about that and knowing that many of us have been active in sort of getting this work out in the open, I think it's interesting that when we see pictures from the past of the civil rights movement, for example, we see predominantly non-disabled Black people part of that. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, when we look at the independent living and disability movement rights movements, we see predominantly white disabled people as a part of that. So where is the disconnect? We know that folks with disabilities who are Black are active in civil rights. Where's the disconnect? Why aren't we seeing that in the media? What do both parties need to do to bridge that gap? And then I'd also be curious to hear how you yourselves have been active over the last several months, or how have you seen people's activism outside of the traditional protesting? How can the community of people with disabilities who might not be able to attend a traditional protest, stay active in the conversation? So I'll start, Donna, if you don't mind thinking about that.
Sure. You raised some really good questions. So I'm going to approach it from various angles here. So I'm first of all going to look at the movement itself and the Me Too movement, for example, the Black Lives Matter movement. And, how is it that we don't see maybe Black folk with disabilities participating? And I want to say that we really do see them. But you know what happens? With Black people with disabilities, sometimes they do not disclose their disabilities. They are active. They're there. They're just not portrayed in the media. There's this disconnect, with the intersectionality of the piece. I mean, most Black people with disabilities, and I'll speak for them because I speak with most of the individuals that are in my organization. And what is shared is that Black people with disabilities, or Black people who may have disabilities, will never disclose it because it just adds one more sort of mark against being, something's wrong, or it's, you're already dealing with the race aspect. And so they don't want to disclose the fact that they have a disability because they feel that, again, it further marginalizes who they are. So they are on the front lines doing the work. And it kind of does a disservice in a way that people are not seeing that they are disabled. But again, that goes back to the piece of just because you don't see the disability doesn't mean that they don't have a disability. So that's one aspect of that. And then I think about how other people are involved in the movement. There are other ways besides protesting that people are very active. One particular important way that people are involved is through writing. Is through actually doing stories, making sure that their stories are being told. I mean, with the Divas with Disabilities Project, one of the mission is to reshape the perspective of what disability looks like by promoting Black and brown women through various media platforms. And the one way we do that is we tell our stories. We show the imagery. So we show ourselves in various aspects of civic engagement. And we are quite active in, doing the work, if you will, in terms of changing the perspective of what the abilities, if you will, and what persons with disabilities, Black women with disabilities, are able to do and not to do, the abilities. So we're focusing on the abilities. So I think that it does get a mixed message in a sense, in terms of you're not seeing Black people with disabilities on the front lines, if you will, and the media does not do a good job of amplifying that, but they're only able to amplify what is disclosed to them. I don't really think that it's a pure erasure of Black people with disabilities on the front lines. I think that Black people with disabilities are on the front lines doing the work. It's just that the recognition is just not given because no one really wants to disclose that they have a disability, if you will.
And this is Janet. I think also, along with that, I think that it's important also to recognize that individuals who are Black and living with disabilities also are still very much underrepresented, not only in the media, but in the mainstream of our culture. And that's within organizations and agencies also. And I think that nationally, when you look at the disability organizations, some do better than others with integrating individuals who are Black with disabilities into their respective organizations. I think that nationally, certainly the history of our disability community derived from the civil rights, movement in our country. And I think that looking at it from a policy perspective, that disability groups, regardless of whether they're Black or they're white, need to come together, I think, more collectively and engage each other and look at it again from a holistic approach. And we've got some work to continue to do on our own level of inclusion as well within our own community. But also we've got some work that needs to be continued, I think, from the perspective of both the attitudes and barriers and stigmas about how we feel about ourselves as individuals with disabilities, and how our families view us in the role of the family and in our respective community, in our churches, in the Black community. And I think that we have to get more engaged. I think also just the both education, but also civic responsibilities in terms of looking at both our local as well as national obligation as citizens, regardless of what background you're from, to be engaged in your community and to get that education and get out there, register to vote, because our voices don't get heard if we're not voting, if we're not being proactive about what issues are important to us and why we're being left out of the conversation. It is important to have that perspective, as well as the education and the programs and opportunity for people to get educated about that and take action to do that, because our voices do not get heard. They will not be heard. And that the disability community has to do a better job, I think, at working together with each other collectively around, issues that impact us as a whole, as a disability community. Policymakers hear our voices collectively. They hear them as individuals when there's enough voices, but they hear us when we're speaking the same language. They hear us when we are advocating on the same pathway, that will elevate the entire community, not just one individual, not just one organization. And they are responsive to that. They hear us when we're voting. We need to, I think, do a much better job at being inclusive around all of those issues that will help elevate the community as a whole.
And not forget about accessibility, that maybe, a large factor is accessibility, having access to these organizations, that when they're planning these particular meetings and organizations and protests, or, that they have to make them so that individuals with disabilities can access them. A lot of times, people with disabilities are locked out of these opportunities because they can't get there because of the barriers that exist.
Yes.
This is Lori. You have both just brought up like a dozen points that we could go on and talk on for so long. But as we're nearing our final 5 minutes or so together, I just want to ask a couple final questions. One being that thinking about kind of short and long-term solutions here, in the next 6 months, what do you think are the major challenges a person who is Black and disabled is facing?
This is Janet. I think in the short term, over the next 6 months, particularly since we're in this COVID-19 environment, I think that individuals are going to be thinking about ways that they can, first of all, stay safe, ways that they can make sure that they have the opportunity, if they are employed, to maintain employment. I think they're going to be, individuals are worried about whether or not they can feed themselves, whether or not they can continue to contribute either to the workforce or to their community or to their family. I think that these are very much prevalent issues that are over the next 6 months are going to be prevalent. Staying safe in the community as an African American with a disability, I think is beyond 6 months. This has not been a issue that's been a short-term issue for African Americans. It's a lifelong issue for people. So I think that in these particular types of environments that we're in right now, I think there are multiple issues that individuals are worried about, and certainly have an opportunity, I think, again, from the inspirational perspective, to get educated, to participate, to get connected. Don't stay isolated. Reach out, to your local community. Reach out to local church members. If you're not a part of a church, find a way to become a part of something. Don't sit in isolation, and certainly find some way or someone, to help with being proactive within your respective situation. If you're having difficulty with accessing services, reach out to agencies. If you're not getting anywhere, reach out to your state representatives. Reach out to those officials who can help guide you and can make a difference, in the situation that you may find yourself in. Do not sit in isolation. Do not sit silent. This is the time when people really need to be connected and not disconnected.
And I sort of echo that. This is the time to actually be active, and let activism be your mantra. But also looking at income, individuals with disabilities, and particularly Black folk with disabilities, employment is going to be very important.
Absolutely.
Their health, their security, and most importantly, voting. Thinking about, voting is going to be the most important critical aspect for Black people with disabilities, for all of us, but mainly for, in particular for persons with disabilities who happen to be, Black and brown. Because that's, from my vantage point, from my perspective, that's going to be the major focus of what's going to really move the needle towards all of the sort of systemic things we talk about, the structural things we talk about, in order to move any of these things out of our way so that people can truly live empowered lives. We're going to have to vote. Policies have to be changed, and we have to vote.
And I know we are running very short on time. I apologize for that because we promised to be done at 1, but we might run over a couple of minutes here. So I just want to, any parting thoughts from either of you before we adjourn today?
First of all, this is Donna. I wanted to just say, first of all, I think this is thank you for inviting me to be a part of this forum, to be able to talk about the Black lives of persons with disabilities. It does not get a lot of attention, and it is a necessary topic that needs to be explored. We have to keep in mind about what disability really means. I think that was one of the questions I wanted to ask about, what does being Black and disabled really mean? And I think that when I just having society, if you will, focus on what does that look like. And I just want to say that race is always going to trump my disability. And I cannot separate, my disability from my race, but my race is what I'm always sort of confronted with. And that's going to be the main sort of issue for Black people with disabilities that they are focusing on. So if we can, if one of those issues, can be addressed, I think that the disability piece might be somewhat, it has to coexist, because who we are as individuals, Black people, is what really pretty much gets the attention.
Mhm.
And this is Janet. And first of all, thank you so much for inviting us to be a part of this panel and to have this discussion. I said earlier that sometimes in life, adversity and barriers become a pathway to opportunity. And I really do believe that this is one of those opportunities that we have to take this discussion, to help others to understand the perspective, to help others to partner, together, encourage people to partner together, to bring folks at the table, to certainly help with understanding where we are, where we certainly need to be. But I think also equally important is learning from each other and taking the opportunity to listen and learn from each other. This is, I think, one of those unique opportunities that we have to take a topic and either learn from it, or we will continue to perpetuate the same issues over and over again, and they never get better. They generally get worse. I think that if we don't confront it, then we don't learn from it, and we don't get the opportunity to move forward. And we miss that, opportunity. And it's a very valuable one, because it really does help with changing the paradigm for African Americans with disabilities. I think that it helps to move our society forward as a whole. We have a significant demographic change that's occurring in our country, and as well as globally. And I think that the more time we spend on being afraid of our differences and learn, as opposed to learning from what we have in common, that we risk falling behind, as a nation. And we can't afford to do that. So I'm hopeful, and I'm thinking about this as one of those opportunities.
Good point.
Melissa, did you have any final thoughts or?
No, I just want to thank you both, Dr. Walton and Dr. LaBreck. What an honor to have this time with you. And it was way, way too short. That was the fastest hour that I've had in a long time. So really appreciate you both.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you both. And as a reminder to everybody in the audience, this has been recorded and will be distributed via email later today. And this is part 1 of 2, Black Disabled Lives Matter. Please join us next Friday, July 24th at noon for an intimate conversation with members of our local community. Please visit starclough.org/ADA30 to register for that event and join us for a concert and conversation with Galen Lee at the end of the month. And Melissa, you also have an event coming up.
Well, this is a session that we're offering right now. We don't have one scheduled, but if you or your organization are interested in doing this, it's a conversation that are called Listen, Talk, Learn, and it's focused on race, racism, how to be an anti-racist. If you're interested, you can contact me. My email address is there at the bottom.
And we'll have all of this up on our website and information about about Janet and Donna as well, because I think they were also they're very willing to hear from you, audience members, as well, with and answer any follow-up questions that we weren't able to get to today. So thank you all so much for your time today and for attending. Thank you both, our speakers, for your wonderful insights and experience and all the work that you're doing across the country. So everyone stay safe and stay healthy. Take care.